Hello, darling. I was thinking some stuff, and it seemed worth sharing. I was thinking about imposter syndrome and mental health, and also I was thinking about LGBT allyhood. It is fun to do things that we are good at. Finding things that we enjoy and then getting good at doing them allows us to enjoy them even more. Because we are generally not good at things to start with, we have all experienced not being good. We generally don't enjoy it. A voice that whispers that we are no good at something is not a welcome guest. When we are trying something new and are out of our comfort zone, we are sometimes told to fake it until we make it. We recognise that when imposter syndrome whispers in our ear, it is sometimes better for us not to listen to it, not to allow self-doubt to paralyse us, but to put on a brave face and do the thing anyway. I am not entirely certain if imposter syndrome is actually just one thing, or if it's really an umbrella term for a collection of similar things that we habitually mix up with one another. The sense that we are masquerading as someone that we are not seems to me to come in a range of different flavours. And those differences have something to do with why we are masquerading. The guy in the job interview is masquerading as a good person for the role, but that's such an extreme case of socially accepted imposture that we almost never include that in the syndrome. Fast forward to the same guy after he's been in the job for 2 years, and he still feels the pressure to be effective and efficient, and does his best to not advertise the times when he feels like he's falling short. His manager entrusts certain key tasks to him because he's seen as a safe pair of hands. When he feels like an imposter, sometimes he doesn't like to admit it out loud. Is that because his salary or promotion prospects might be harmed if he did? Is the pressure to not talk about it coming from himself or from his manager? Is it a personal failing of the manager, or is the problem more institutional? Things are even more complicated, I think, for jobs where other people's confidence in you has a direct impact upon your own effectiveness. I was a teacher for many years, and I certainly felt that I needed to keep a mask up, play a role, if I wanted to keep control of a class and convince them to listen to me. I'm not saying that it would be impossible to talk about one's personal self-doubt and still teach effectively, but you'd certainly be making your job much, much harder by doing so. Feeling like you are not very good at being a teacher, the professional imposter syndrome, feels slightly different to me again than feeling like you're not very good at being a grown-up. One of the criticisms that I sometimes hear about the current generation that are in their 20s is that they aren't as grown-up as they ought to be. I always feel like congratulating them about that. I think I spent too much time in my 20s feeling like an imposter, oblivious to the idea that this was normal, that I was fine. Then there are those situations where we can't always blame external factors for setting us up for imposter syndrome. Our hobbies and the things we do for fun are also a playground for demons of self-doubt. Almost anyone who makes things for fun, whether those are physical things made of yarn or card, or whether they are playing music or writing stories or any form of creative endeavour, has experienced those moments where you look at the thing you are making and are suddenly convinced that it is awful and worthless and a total waste of time. One important step in shielding oneself from the worst excesses of imposter syndrome is to name it for what it is and, crucially, to recognise how commonplace it is. Coming to realise that this is normal, that almost everyone experiences this, is an important step towards keeping it in perspective. This is, sadly, not a video about how to magically cure imposter syndrome. I have nothing for you, I'm afraid, on the "wow, I wish this would go away" front. The best I can offer you is that, like so many areas of mental health, people often report that talking about it seems to help more than not talking about it. I said that almost everyone experiences this because there may be people who never feel self-doubt. You may have met them or read about them. Generally, the received wisdom is that a total lack of self-doubt is probably a personality defect rather than a superpower. The response to meeting them does tend not to be, "wow, I wish I were like them." That said, I do recognise that there is a certain degree of cultural variation about what is an acceptable level of self-confidence. The British tend to lean into a kind of self-deprecating modesty that can feel strange to an American. The stereotype of Americans, on the other hand, is that they are culturally conditioned towards talking themselves up to a degree that feels uncomfortable to many of the British. My other caveat, when saying that almost everyone experiences this, is that, obviously, your personal mileage may vary. Some people seem to use the phrase imposter syndrome to refer to almost any moment of self-doubt. Others reserve it for episodes of self-doubt that flare up in a particularly intense or paralysing way, but which are transient and temporary. Others still experience feelings of intense self-doubt that are persistent, long-lasting, and profoundly debilitating. Extreme cases of crippling self-doubt are certainly a mental health issue. But, conversely, health concerns can also be a focus for imposter syndrome. Am I really in that much pain, people ask themselves, or am I exaggerating it? Am I really on the autistic spectrum? Am I really experiencing something that qualifies as disability, or am I just an imposter? I've read enough online, written by people going through this, to realise once again how commonplace this is. Almost everyone who struggles with chronic conditions seems to have this voice that comes and visits them and tries to undermine their confidence in their own story. The same is true in the LGBT community. There are people who are lucky enough to be certain of their sexuality and never feel any doubt about it, but there are others who take time to find their labels and who have written about the imposter syndrome that they experienced. I have also read things by some LGBT people who dislike what they see as a taboo about doubt. They feel that people in some parts of the gay community feel pressure to stay silent about any imposter syndrome that they might experience and are pushed into a kind of performative certainty that does not actually best support their own mental health. And that brings us finally to the trans community. Now, I can't speak for the trans community. I have questioned my gender identity because it seemed sensible to at least double-check a thing like that, but the answer to that questioning came back firmly in the male. I am assigned male at birth and male by self-diagnosis, which leaves me both irredeemably male and 100% cis. My knowledge of the trans community, therefore, comes entirely from reading and listening. I read what they say, and, more distressingly still, I read what is said about them. I look at their current situation in this country, and I just want to give them all a hug. I can't imagine any group of people for whom a discussion of imposter syndrome might be more bitterly relevant. I simply don't understand how this country can be so full of otherwise sensible people, all of whom know very well that a little self-doubt is just a normal part of being human, but who have decided that, for the trans community, the key that we should choose for them to unlock any kind of support, for them to have our permission to exist, should be total certainty on their part. If they dare admit to any doubt in their identity, then they are deemed unworthy. And then we complain when so many of them sound like extremists, as if moderation was an option that we'd left on the table. There's a reason why they seem to be so all in, and it's not because they're being brainwashed by other trans people. It's because this is the needle that we've given them to thread. Can you imagine a more insidious trap? If I wanted to deliberately construct a torture chamber for 1 in 200 of the population, this might be how I'd go about it. Now, we know full well that there are people who would approve of that. But I don't believe that this kind of crippling catch-22 is the honest intention of the majority of people in this country. It's just being done in their name. Now, all of this is just my opinion. Like I said earlier, I don't speak for the trans community. I'm just an outside observer. But this is what I have observed, and these are the opinions that I have formed. I would like to live in a world in which members of the trans community were allowed a little more self-doubt, were allowed to talk about imposter syndrome. I hope that, behind closed doors, they do talk about it to each other. I think that would be good for them. I think they might be happier, and I want that for them. And for all of us, trans and cis alike, I wish you all the best in your negotiations with the voices in your head. And if today happens to be a day when you've come off the worst, then, well, I hope that there are better days to follow. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about, and it felt worth sharing. See you soon.